that the attention to detail that they should afford their operational duties is carried out, sir.
I call the Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Speaker, I do firstly want to pay tribute to the New Zealand Police and also to the two colleagues opposite who are ex-policemen. Police do a job which none of us would want to do, and I think very few of us would be capable of doing, and they show extreme courage in looking after the communities and saving lives and putting themselves between those in society who would want to do others harm and our communities. That being said, I note with interest that two of the ex-police folk who are now members of Parliament and members of the National Party made some very interesting contributions on this bill. Mr Mitchell got up and said that he praised the Minister of Police for oversight and how diligently, excuse me, I think somebody may have put something in my water, had dealt with this issue. What he failed to say, of course, is that the previous Minister of Police, one Judith Collins, had also dealt, in theory, with this issue. And I say to Mr Sabin that he makes an interesting point. He talks about the need for attention to detail, but somehow in that concept he absolves the old Westminster tradition that a minister is responsible, that a minister has ultimate oversight. And he says, well, this is an operational matter, you know, the police, well, that's where the member is wrong. He notes that this is an operational matter, but here's the difference, I say to Mr Sabin. After there's been one stuff-up at an operational level, you'd think if you were a diligent minister, you'd put it on the checklist, and every now and again you'd say to the Commissioner, now, Commissioner, we haven't, you know, we're swearing the boys and girls in appropriately, aren't we? This is all okay, isn't it? And what it actually means is you know the right questions to ask as a minister. It's called doing your duty. A bit like, you know, Mr Brownlee with the earthquake. I'm sure he's very diligent. I'm sure he was very diligent, for instance, in ensuring that the Christchurch City Council had consents as their top priority and were doing it properly. Well, that's as we know, a good twoies ad. You've got to know as a minister, and you have a duty, Mr Sabin, as a minister, to ask the right questions and to monitor your department, especially after stuff-up number one. Stuff-up number one. And I say this is serious, and I pay tribute to Mr Clennon, who made a very good point. This is serious because 63 officers, as my colleague said, may well indeed put themselves in legal harm's way, and probably have put themselves in legal harm's way, legally that is, and put themselves in personal jeopardy in respect of the law, because technically they have acted outside the law, because their elders and betters did not swear them in an appropriate fashion, were not authorised, that is, to swear them in an appropriate fashion, and the minister was asleep at the wheel. So I say to Mr Sabin, ministers have a duty to ask the right questions. Ministers don't just sit there like a bunch of muppets and believe everything that their departmental officials tell them. When I was a minister, I used to ask frequently, now, can I have some evidence or an example of what you're saying is absolutely correct, so that I can see some evidence? Or, by the way, I'd go and actually ask for some third-party advice. But maybe Minister Tolley was too busy sort of dancing on the hood of the old boy racer's car and photo opportunities rather than actually doing her job. And, of course, they accuse us of politics. They say, oh, this is unintentional. This was a mistake. They always do that over there when it's their crew that have stuffed up. Well, I say to the minister, once is a mistake, twice is incompetence, and 3 times is negligence. And she ought to realise, as Minister of Police, as Mr Clendon said, and Mr Sabin and Mr Mitchell would know this, if they had been one of the 63 who had done a superb job looking after our communities, and then the bosses came in and said, sorry, technically you've acted illegally. You could be in trouble. You could have, I've got to go up to the Minister's office and ask her, can we bang through some legislation? And I agree with other speakers that say that it is appropriate that we deal with this under urgency, that it is appropriate in this one particular case that we put forward retrospective legislation. And I say to those commentators another colleague alleged that somehow there'd been some backdoor deal with Labor and National. My colleague Jacinda Ardern advises me there has been no meeting with her as police spokesman. This issue was brought up and dealt with all parties in the Business Committee by Mr Brownlee. And I've got to say, Mr Brownlee, in his sort of staccato, on again, off again, up again, down again sort of management of the House, it was very interesting, the scorn on his face. The scorn on his face that can only be directed at the colleague that sits directly behind him, the Minister of Police. Because poor old Jerry Brownlee had to get up and take the hit and move the motion. Took him 2 goes to do it, but hey, you know, that's okay. And actually take the hit for the Minister of Police. So that crew over there accuse us of politics. Very convenient. But that crew over there, of course, are always the ones that get up and demand accountability from everybody, from beneficiaries, from all sorts of people in the community. They demand transparency. They demand accountability, except, of course, when it comes to themselves. And if you look at the litany of stuff-ups, the litany of mismanagement and negligence that this government is engaged in, from Solid Energy, state-owned enterprise, run into the ground while they were asleep at the wheel, to the MRP botch-up, 10% down the wazoo, to the Meridian share price stuffed up through their greed and incompetence. And now, sir, quite rightly, we come back to the bill, and again, the Minister asleep at the wheel, didn't ask the right questions, even after a mistake is made. But there's a pattern here. If you look at some of the other portfolios, as somebody sort of yawns over there, you know, again, asleep at the wheel with Solid Energy, made the mistake with the asset sales, but didn't learn from it. Exactly the same as this. Made a mistake in 2009, and it's gone on again since 2009, and never learned from it. And I just say to the Minister, can she explain in the next speech she may give why it was, or did she ask any questions? Did she have this on her checklist every 3 months to say, Commissioner, now our staff are okay, well, there's no problem with the oath, there's no problem with the authorisation, I'm not going to have to get down on bended knee to the Leader of the House in an embarrassing way and beg forgiveness and beg for a piece of legislation to be put through this House. And it's interesting, and I wonder what police are doing as they scratch their heads, and look at the incompetence with which this government carries out its activities. Because of course, this government demands accountability from the police to do their job, hit their targets, even though their budgets have been cut. 52 police, says the annual report, that this crew have brought in since 2009. And as my colleague Phil Goff said, we backed the police all right. We backed them with 1,000 extra frontline staff. No ifs, no buts, no weasel words. We just did it. So I say to Ms Tolley, maybe she needs to go and maybe do a ministerial course with the Cabinet Secretary or something and get some advice on doing her job. Because if the standard of ministerial responsibility is, oh, gee whiz, it's a bit of a mistake, sorry it happened, but, you know, it's not really our fault. It's always the fault of the officials, of course, never responsible for anything. This government's always the fault of the officials. Then she ought to get a life herself, to quote Shane Jones about another minister there. Because there is a pattern here. They don't stand up, Mr Speaker, and take responsibility for anything. They do, well, if you take responsibility, do you? That's great. Well, in the next speech that the minister gives, she might actually, sir, get up and tell us what she did, what monitoring she put in place, whether she asked the right questions, because there was already a precedent of a stuff-up and mistake back in 2009. And it's a pity that Judith Collins doesn't take a call, because if there was ever a minister who stands up and pontificates and looks down her nose at everybody else with that familiar Tory sneer on her face of betterment, that she is better than everybody else, of course, that she is better than everybody else, it's Judith Collins. And I wouldn't mind, sir, a bit of accountability out of her. I wouldn't mind a bit of accountability out of her, sir, in respect of her part in this. Because, oh yes, they're full of mouth when it comes to interjection, sir, but they stand up and make 27-second speeches because they want to get out of jail on this one big time. They want to run away and hide big time on this. Even Ruby Wax down the back there, sir.
I call the honourable member Brenda.